used to this day. As the closest First Nation community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and as a municipality, we join them in these responsibilities. We further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas and Chippewas recognized through Treaty Number 13, as well as the Williams Treaties of 1923. Shared understanding of the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. Councilor, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Councilor Reese, Councilor Gallo, comments, questions? Call a vote. Ronnie Scrap. Emily, I'm a yes. Councilor Kim? Okay. Councilor Kim's a yes. That carries. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, no delegations. We have one item for consideration, amendment to development charge bylaw as per Bill 185 public meeting. Presentation to be provided by Byron Tan, manager, Watson and Associates. Byron, welcome.
Good evening, council.
Yep, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Oh, perfect. Just sharing my screen. And please let me know when you could see that.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, well, good evening, members of council, staff, and the public. Happy to be in front of you again today to undertake another mandatory public meeting under the Development Charges Act. And really, we're here just to do a minor update to your bylaw. However, any updates to the DC, if it does not require a minor amendment under Bill 185 of the Development Charge Act, essentially needs to go through this public process. So that's why I'm here before you. We are holding this mandatory public meeting. So I'll have a little bit of a synopsis of why we're undertaking it, the legislative context as to why we're here, and then really kind of go through a summary of the proposed policy changes for your bylaw. It's very minor. We're really just conforming to the legislation. However, we still have to go through this process in order for it to be effective. So as part of today's meeting, again, my presentation luckily won't be as long as you've seen in the past. But just as a reminder, I mean, the public meeting is a requirement under the Act in order to provide or gain public input to the proposed changes to your development charge bylaw. So we have met the mandatory timelines. So we did release the background study basically last month. And obviously we're here today now to have the mandatory public meeting, at which point in time subsequent to this, you will be considering the update to the bylaw at a future council meeting date. So why are we here? So one of the things that came about from Bill 185, as many of you know, otherwise known as the Cutting the Red Tape to Build More Homes Act, back in really received royal assent in June 6th of this year, but was first introduced back on April 10th. And, you know, some of the items include removing the mandatory phase-in, re-including the studies, changing the rate freeze for any site plan or zoning bylaw applications down from 2 years to 18 months. And then as the bill provided, it also allowed municipalities to undertake minor amendments and modernizing public notices for those that don't have a newspaper that they can broadly advertise any changes in terms of public policy. Now, keep in mind, I was here a couple of months ago to answer any questions with respect to the removal, the removal of the mandatory phase-in and the inclusion of the studies as part of the bylaw, which is now allowed again as of June 6, 2024. However, Bill 185, while it mentioned the reduction of the rate freeze from 2 years to 18 months, that was not part of the minor amendment process. So if municipalities wanted to update their bylaws so that it reflected 18 months as opposed to 2 years, they had to go through a full DC process, which is what we're doing today. So, as part of our report that was released basically just over a month ago, we've then documented, again, the impetus for this meeting, which would be to reduce the 2 years to 18 months. But as well, we also had one minor amendment as well that we'll present in a subsequent slide. So again, it was part of Bill 185, but wasn't part of the minor amendments that allowed you to do that all in one shot. Hence, we're doing this a second time, or I guess a third time if you count the original public meeting process. One thing to note as well is as of June 1st of this year, and I may have presented this during the last presentation, but the affordable housing, whether it's for rentals or for owned units, is now in effect. And that's in effect as of June 1st, 2024. So just as a refresher, it's considered affordable, the units, that is, if the income of these, if the rent or the purchase price of these units is less than 30% of the 60th percentile of income, within the municipality, or as set out in the bulletin, which, the province did release earlier this year, and it's anticipated that they will be updating it annually. So what does that mean for you? So you now have to offer any affordable exemptions if these items fall within the categories that you're seeing on the right-hand side. So for example, if you have a rental housing, and it has to be a purpose-built rental where all of the units, a minimum of 4 within the building, are considered rental housing. So you can see here, it's considered affordable and will not have to pay DCs. If, for example, a bachelor unit is less than $1,022 a month, a 1-bedroom is less than $1,371, 2-bedroom, $1,794, and then the largest, the 3+ bedrooms at less than $2,065. So if you do have any rental housing that meets that criteria, it would be exempt from development charges. Similarly, on the ownership side, the unit has to sell for less than $506,600. So, and this is for all unit types: singles, townhomes, apartments, etc. So if it meets that criteria, they do not have to pay a DC. If it's over that, then obviously a DC is still payable. And amongst all of this information, attainable units are still not defined under the legislation. So we still have that in your bylaw, but it is not currently in effect. So we don't know exactly who would be considered attainable at this time. So that exemption, is not required to be, advanced to the development community as of yet. Now, keep in mind, you may have heard me mention this a number of times, but when you do have these affordable housing exemptions, the Act does require you as a municipality to enter into a 25-year agreement with the developments, or the individuals that are applying for the building permits and paying the DCs. So the Act said that the minister could have prescribed a template for these types of agreements, but none was ever provided. So we are working with the Municipal Finance Officers Association, as well as other parties within Ontario, to try to determine what a best practice template looks like in terms of these 25-year agreements. At which time, if it is available, obviously we will share it with our municipal partners. However, this is something that you do have to enter into if this occurs, if these type of units occur. And the mechanism there is, if they ever change hands, so whether the affordable unit is sold or the renter is, going from one renter to the other, if at any given point that it no longer meets the affordability criteria in that given year or in that given time, then there is, within those agreements, there should be, it will outline the recourse for you as a municipality to recoup those DCs. Now, it's unclear, are the DCs to be paid by the original builder? Is it paid by the new owner? Is it the DCs at the time when they were first introduced? Is it the DCs of the day? Those items have not been fleshed out. So this is something that, again, we are working through, trying to figure out all those nuances. And, this is something that, whatever the first agreement that goes out, for municipalities to undertake and distribute, I mean, that would be subject to, the tests that would have to go through the OLT, I'm assuming, if the development side would like to challenge any of those agreements. So this is something that we are monitoring, but it is something you now must extend to the development community. So as part of the updates, and again, I kind of touched upon this earlier in the presentation, we did undertake a recent update as part of Bill 185, where the town did utilize the minor amendment provisions under Section 19 of the Act, so that we included growth-related studies as part of your calculations. The council reviewed the background report as well as passed the amending bylaw back on June 25th. So that's part of your current bylaw and the charges that you are imposing to the development community. As I said, that 2 years to 18-month rate freeze was one of the items that was not part of that minor amendment. So therefore, this is why we're here today, to really just get you to update your bylaw in order to change that time horizon. However, since we're already opening up your bylaw and through discussions with staff, we thought it'd be best to align some of your definitions, most notably retail, with York Region, just for ease of administration when reviewing the bylaws and applying it to any particular developments and building permits. So you don't have a charge for retail right now. That's all at the regional level. But again, it's more so just so that staff are able to then, really just look at one bylaw, at least, from an administration side, and try to determine what retail means. So when they're collecting the regional development charges, it's a little bit easier at the counter. Again, there's no calculation changes with respect to this update. It's simply just updating your definition and updating the policy for the rate freeze. So with that being said, just a little bit of a recap of, what's transpired with DCs in the town. We originally released the background study and draft bylaw back in January of this year. We had your new bylaw essentially passed by March 26th and in effect. And on June 6th, when Bill 185 was released, we then reacted quickly and reintroduced growth studies as part of your bylaw. And as you can see here, subsequent to that, we then undertook a separate process so that we can, again, amend your bylaw for a second time in order to introduce the 2 years to 18 months deduction, as well as updating that one definition. So we're here today as the mandatory public meeting, and we're looking to come back near the end of the month for you to consider the bylaw. And just to recap on the current DCs that are in effect as of July 1st, you can see here this table now includes your studies, or what's known as general government. So essentially, we're adding now $569 on a single family home. So your total charge right now is $38,570. Again, this is not something that is being debated today. All this presentation is meant to do is just to inform you of the two policy changes to your bylaw, as everything else is still in effect. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Council, the recommendation is that report number FIN 24-043 be received. 2, that the memo dated August 23rd, 2024 regarding 2024 development charges background study update amendments as per Bill 185 be endorsed. And 3, that any new comments, questions, suggestions arising from the statutory public meeting be referred to staff for consideration. And 4, that council hereby determines that no further public meetings are required under Section 12 of Development Charges Act 1997. Someone want to move the recommendation? Councilor Thompson, thank you. Second, Councilor Gardner. Are there any comments or questions to the presentation or the report? Councilor Gallo.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Tam. Could you just, to the extent that you can, go through the affordable housing part of the bylaw again. Like, what if a developer is to come forward and wants to take advantage of that today? There seems to be a lot of outstanding questions. How would staff here deal with that?
Mr. Tan?
Great question. Through your worship, to the counselor. Right now, again, and with any new legislation, it's really a gray area for administration until, of course, there's an issue that arises that then gets settled through the OLT. With respect to the exemption, as it deals with affordable housing, the Act is, for the most part, pretty clear on how it's to be applied. It must, so if you, take a look at, the section in the Act that talks about affordable housing, it essentially states that, as I mentioned in my presentation, that it needs to meet the income criteria. And it needs to fall within the parameters that are released as part of that annual bulletin by the province. So in your case there, if you have the presentation up on your screen, if let's say, for example, it's an owned unit, so again, a purchased home that would be privately owned, the purchase price of that unit has to be less than $506,000. If it does not meet that criteria, it's not considered affordable, even if it's branded as such. Whatever marketing or whatever items are labeled as affordable in terms of this retail sale of the developer or the builder, the only criteria that matters is it being sold for less than $506,000? And if that's not the case, then it's not affordable under the Development Charges Act. And then similarly for affordable rent, they need to demonstrate that the rent for that unit is less than that, $1,000 to $2,000, depending on the unit size. And if it does not meet that criteria, it's not considered affordable.
Thank you. I'm clear on that. It's more the items that you actually brought up, the agreement, the terms of those agreements, as well as basically what you brought up. What if there's a change of hands, 3 years down the road, where if it's a condominium, the developer's way on his way, and who's responsible for that? Those are really important questions that need to be answered and known fairly quickly.
That's right. Through your worship and through the counselor, that's something that we are trying to work through right now, again, with our municipal partners and through the MFOA, the Municipal Finance Officers Association. As I said, there's no template right now that's available, via the province. We thought that there was going to be one that was prescribed by the minister. However, unfortunately, none was ever provided. So what they're essentially, the messaging is, it's up to the municipality to figure out how they want to structure that agreement. Now, the agreement, again, in inferring with what's required under the Act, there has to be some type of mechanism then to track it on an annual basis in order to determine that it is still considered affordable. However that mechanism may be, this is something that's, again, there's no concrete answer. And then unfortunately too, the mechanism on who pays the DC and what the quantum of the DC, that's not prescribed anywhere in the Act. So there's all this gray area that unfortunately, there's no guidance from the province. So this is something where, as I mentioned earlier, while these agreements, whatever municipality comes out first with an agreement, chances are that's going to be that best practice amongst other municipalities that probably have that same criteria. However, this is now where, do developers agree with those policies within there? And this is where, again, I think it, at the end of the day, would it be challenged at the OLT? But, in essence, if they're signing the agreement, then they're agreeing to the terms within that agreement. And there's a lot of nuance and a lot of leeway for municipalities to deviate from, one municipality to the other based on how you perceive you want to, charge back. Now, I would like to say then also that within the Development Charge Act, you do have an opportunity to put any unpaid DCs to the roll number of the lot and the house, or the actual building and structure. So that's not specific to the agreements. However, because a portion of the Act allows you to do that, that then could then say, well, as part of the agreement, if it's unpaid, Sorry, if it's no longer considered affordable because it was sold, let's say in 2030, and it's now sold for profit, which is above and beyond the affordable threshold, then really at that point it's who's going to pay that development charge and what's the quantum? Is it the old charge or the new charge? And then from there, if it's now to the new owner, does that then go on the tax roll? And then is that just collected over time? Is it going to be collected on an annual installment payments with interest? Again, all of these items are all unknowns at this time. And I wish I could give you a concrete answer, but unfortunately, no one has an agreement developed as of today, or at least one that's actually being implemented.
Council?
Thank you. And clearly there's a lot of question marks. The whole point of this is to encourage developers to build affordable housing. But if the obstacles are so great, or there's so many loops and bounds that they have to go through, it just becomes more and more difficult to encourage them to do that. So I hope we figure these things out quickly.
Thank you, Councilor Gardner.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Did you say that according to the DC Act, that unpaid DCs are the responsibility of the homeowner?
So through your worship and through Councillor. So the way the act reads is if there are any unpaid development charges, that it can go on the tax roll. So that essentially would fall to the homeowner if they're the ones that are holding the title. I'm not sure if there's been a situation where a municipality has gone back to the original builder or developer. Again, that's something I could research for you, but as of right now, the act just says it goes on title and the roll number. That's all it says.
Council?
Through Mr. Mayor, that would seem exceedingly unfair to me. So the affordability criteria that you went through, I don't think there's anything in Aurora that would qualify for this with respect to rental or purchase. But going back to what you said, if a developer builds something, let's say builds a rental that's affordable under this criteria, and then can they decide in the next 2, 3, whatever years to raise the rent so that it becomes unaffordable?
Great question. Through your worship and the council, this is where the agreements would come in to stipulate that that doesn't happen. As I said, the agreements have to monitor whether it stays affordable. So if it does go, let's say for my example, where a bachelor or studio apartment is, it has to be $1,022. And let's assume that dollar stayed constant over the next 10 years. So really at any point in time, if that rent then exceeds that, but the province still states that in order for it to be affordable to be $1,022, then at that point, it's no longer considered affordable and you have now your recourse to charge development charges. But again, the mechanism to do that's what we're trying to figure out right now.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and in particular to, I'm not sure what staff and the CAO. So we would have to keep very careful track of this. Would it be the responsibility of finance, building? Whose response? Thank you.
Mayor Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we would have to develop a process for actually monitoring these. Staff don't do this today, so that would be additional work that would have to be taken on. So we would need to look at how we would go about it doing this. But to the affordability in these agreements, Jason Gartner is actually part of the MFOA working group. So he's involved with that group and we're staying abreast of figuring this out as we go forward and working with other municipalities. To our knowledge at this point, there's only one municipality that has an agreement template for apartments, and that's the City of London.
Councilor?
Thank you. So just as a comment, it's a moot point right now because we don't have anything that qualifies for this, but it wouldn't be impossible for a developer to do this, to apply, get, not pay the DCs and then decide to really raise the rent unless there's anything in the Ontario legislation that says it can't be raised by more than a certain amount. I don't think that exists anymore. Maybe through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Ramuno, or anybody. Are there any safeguards to protect renters that something can't be?
Mr. Mayor?
I think that's the old days, can't be raised more than a certain amount every year.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is there's only a limitation on premises that were built before a certain date. I can't remember what that date was, but newer ones, there's no limitation. The thing is, if an organization is going forth with affordable housing, and then they need to stay in alignment with what's in the DCA, if they want to keep that DC exemption, otherwise DCs will be payable.
Yeah, and Councillor, I was just going to add, I would assume, and Mr. Mayor and Kessel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Mr. Tan, even if it went $1 above, so if it was $1,023, then they wouldn't be exempt no longer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so
It
even
is
if they
very-
raise
it's very
$1, Councillor, raise rent by $1, which I'm sure they would be able to do, and there would be no restrictions, so that would get rid of the exceptions.
Well, if it's complicated and very unclear. And once again, I am going to say to this council and to Mr. Mayor, and probably as our representative at the region, or other staff, I don't think we have the land, but if we did, we should be lobbying the federal government to put forward the type of housing I have, which is a federal co-op, which is not subsidized, but everybody does some work and that keeps the rent low. And my rent is actually would be considered affordable on this chart. But we could do a co-op on top of the SARC, or we could do a co-op anywhere.
As we are not housing providers, Councillor, I would say that's the responsibility of the federal government to make that decision on creating whether they want to move forward with doing that again.
I know there's money out there, so I wish we could figure out how to get it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Weiss?
Thank you. The only other variable in this affordable housing also has to do with the income of households. And they suggest with an asterisk that it'll be set out in a new bulletin. Is there such a thing as the bulletin now? Can we identify that for this community, or is this bulletin another thing that is going to be prepared for us on a semi-annual, annual, whatever the number is, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Tan?
Mr. Tan?
Yeah, through your worship. So as I mentioned, the bulletin has been released, and the numbers that I quoted on the screen are specific to Aurora. So every municipality has a different number.
Right.
They all have different thresholds.
Councillor?
And again, the other question is the updating of this, how often does it happen on an annual basis?
Mr. Tan?
And through the mayor, through your worship, our understanding is it would be updated annually. However, since this is the first year, we're not sure whether it's going to be exactly on the date, but that was our understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, call the vote. Mr. Tan, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Emily, I'm a yes. Oh. Councillor Weiss? Councillor Weiss, yes. That carries. Confirming bylaw. Someone like to move that? Councillor Gardner, Councillor Kim, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Weiss, Councillor Gardner, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries.